Okay, so I'm going to explain how to find the inverse of a matrix using the given equations. So your first step is to convert your given equations into matrix format. So over here off to the side, I'm going to just transcribe this over. So we have 1x, no y's, and 1z in the first one. And then we have 2x's, 1y, and 3z. And then we have a negative 1x, 1y, and 1z. So this is our A matrix. And then we're going to rewrite the variables. And this will be identified as x. And then lastly, this is equal to our remaining answer, which is known as b. So these are multiplied to equal this. This is commonly used in algebra, but you add a more complex way of thinking into solving for inverses of a matrix and different matrices, and that's why you don't see it until upper level math. But this is the coefficient matrix. These are our variables, and this is our answer column. Okay, so now that we have that, our first step here is to find the inverse of matrix A. Which is this. Okay, so first you're going to set up your matrix A compared to the identity matrix. So here I'm going to write 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 3, negative 1, 1, 1, bar, and then our identity matrix, which is this particular set of ones and zeros, but it has to be this particular way, written this particular way, because if it's changed at all, you'll have to make the proper accommodations and proper changes to your previous matrix in order to make it even. So right now, that's what our goal is, and so by having it written that way, what our real goal is to reduce this left side to make it look like the identity matrix so that they'll switch places, and the right side will then equal the inverse of A. So since you try to start with what's closest to your identity, but because already here we have our ones in the places that they need to be, it really doesn't matter where we start. In general, it doesn't matter where you start, but you try to work smarter, not harder, and that's where you will start wherever it looks most like your identity. But because there's really no right or wrong way here, given that our number, we already have our ones in places, then we're just going to start with our top row. So I'm going to start rewriting it. 0, 1, 2, 1, 3, negative 1, 1, 1, bar. I am just rewriting it so that I have space to multiply. Okay, there we go. Okay, so our whole goal is to make the columns change, and so I'm first going to start off by multiplying a negative 2 here, because in this area, you're trying to get this to make it where it looks like this. So we're going to focus one column at a time. So we're going to make this equal to 0, and by getting it equal to 0, you find the inverse. The inverse of 2 is a negative 2. So you're going to multiply a negative 2 across the top row, and then gradually add each number to the bottom row. Okay? So let me go ahead and set this up to where we have some space to put the values, I'm going to go ahead and fill out my first row because we already know that that's not changing, because what you're going to do is you're multiplying what you're distributing to your reference row, and so your reference row is what you will not be changing, and this is then added to the row that you're trying to change and trying to replace. So here we're going to have -2 times 1 and then add it to 2, and then we're just going to keep doing that. Multiply and then add, multiply and then add, okay? So -2 times 1 is a -2 plus 2 gives you 0. And then -2 times 0 gives you 0, so add 0 to 1 and it's 1. -2 times 1, -2 plus 3 is your +1. So you should have that. And we're just going to keep going. Just ignore the bar. You're going to keep going past the bar, so don't let that be a boundary line. So then I'm just going to go ahead and fill the rest in. -2 times 1 is -2 plus 0, -2. -2 times 0 is 0, so you keep your 1. -2 times 0 is 0, so you keep your 0. Okay? So now our next step is to make this bottom row here into, you have to multiply it by a +1, because this +1 is, this -1 needs to change to a positive. So again, we already did this, so I'm going to just cross it off, but you know what we previously did. So then you're going to multiply this by a +1. So, but this time, again, we've already done row 2, and now we're trying to change row 3. So you're really only focusing on one row at a time. You are not doing it to every single row, and that's super imperative. So you have 1 times 1. Again, I'm just going to transcribe and I'll go over it real quick because a lot of this is mental math and it'll be faster to just do and then explain. So I have my 1 times 1, and then it's added to a -1, 0, and then so forth and so on. 0, you keep your 1. 1 times 1, you add that to 1, that gives you 2. And then same thing. You're just doing the same process over and over and over. Okay, so I went ahead and started rewriting things in order to save time, because YouTube is being particular about time. So here, if you notice though, you already have what the goal is. Our goal is to get this identity set on the left side, and you already have one column finished, and that's the goal, is to separate it by columns, even though you're making changes by rows. So you're making changes by rows, but you're going to see the end result according to column. Okay? So now you're going to, so now you have your first column, done, and now we're going to keep going. So I already set up the next line here, and what we're going to end up doing though is now you're going to start multiplying to this one. So here, the next line that we're going to really change is you have your 1 in place here. So what we're needing to do is change this bottom one. So I'm going to multiply a -1 because that's the inverse of this one, and I'll multiply it to the row above it in order to add it to this one. So now I'm going to have actually, let me rewrite this row and then we'll multiply in a minute. Okay, now we'll multiply. So a -1 times 0 gives you 0. So you'll just keep your 0 down here. -1 times 1 is a -1, so you get your 0 again. -1 times 1, you're just gonna keep going. This gives you 1. And I'm just gonna write this kind of fast and explain as I go. So then you get your -1 times 1, that gives you -1. Add it to 2 gives you 1. -2 times -1, that gives you a +2. You add it to 1 and that gives you a +3. and then negative 1 times 1 gives you a positive 1, or negative 1, sorry, and you add that over here, so it gives you negative 1, oh my goodness, and and then you get this to 0 plus 1, and that gives you your 1. So you should have something like that, and now you'll notice that it's updated to where this column and this column are both parts of what you're wanting to go for your identity. So cool beans, we're getting there. Only one more column left. So now the last and final step is to multiply your top two by a negative 1, since that's what you're trying to get to 0. So over on your other side, your reference here is going to be your bottom row this time. 0, 1, 3, negative 1, 1. So now you're going to multiply this row by negative 1 and add it to the other rows. So in this case, you're going to have it added to both rows, because you're still going to go one row at a time, because it's better that way. It's better for future reference. If you do 2 rows and get in the habit of that, you can mess up, and it's better to do it one row at a time so you don't mess up for future reference. So we're still going to go one at a time, but because we're having to knock out a positive 1 on both rows, we're going to do the same thing to both rows. So here I'm going to have a 0, 1, 0, negative 5, 2, and negative 1. So if you just sit, look at the math, you're multiplying across and adding it up. So you should gradually see what I'm doing here. Okay, so now you're going to do the same thing. You've done this row, so this is all moved over. So I'm going to keep the same color because we're multiplying still by the same number, but just keep in mind that it's now being added to the top row now. So now we're going to have 1 still in our 0 and our 0, and really if you think about it, these are both 0, so you could have just transcribed these. It was super fast and super easy, but it's better to go through the process and again write row by row, because if you don't, then you're going to risk messing up in the future. So now we've completed our inverse, because this is our identity, and the whole goal was to get our identity on the left side. So you should have your new identity, your inverse of A, looking to be, if my pen will write, negative 2, 1, negative 1, negative 5, 2, negative 1, 3, negative 1, and 1. Okay, so that's how you solve for the inverse of A, or the inverse of a matrix. I know it's a long process, and I know that there's a little bit of confusion and quite a bit of steps, but hopefully that made some sense and made it a little bit easier. And if you have any questions, you can totally ask me and I will answer them and hopefully make things clearer for you. But I hope that helped. Bye.